Every morning, before millions of people leave their homes, the same ritual quietly unfolds. A kettle whistles. Bread drops into a toaster. Coffee begins to brew. Across cities, villages, and suburbs, breakfast tables come to life almost in perfect synchrony. A few hours later, offices empty as workers head for lunch. Then, as the sun sets, families gather once again for dinner. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. 3 meals a day. It's a rhythm so familiar that it feels as though it has always existed. We follow it without hesitation, teach it to our children, and rarely stop to ask where it came from. But here's a question that has puzzled historians, anthropologists, and nutrition researchers alike. Who decided that humans should eat 3 meals a day? Was it nature? Was it biology? Or was it someone else? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Surely our bodies must have evolved to eat this way. After all, if billions of people across the world follow the same pattern, it must be hardwired into us. Right. But the deeper you look into human history, the stranger the story becomes. Because the truth is, for most of human existence, nobody knew what breakfast, lunch, or dinner even meant. Imagine waking up tomorrow in a world without clocks. No alarm to wake you. No office to rush to. No school timetable. No restaurant opening hours. Would you still feel hungry at exactly 7 in the morning? Would your stomach somehow know that it was breakfast time? Probably not. Because hunger doesn't own a watch. Your body doesn't carry a calendar. And evolution never programmed humans to eat according to the hands of a clock. That raises an uncomfortable possibility. If our bodies didn't invent the 3-meal system, who did? To answer that question, we have to travel back thousands of years. Long before supermarkets. Long before farming. Long before civilization itself. Back to a time when every meal had to be earned. A time when eating wasn't part of a daily routine. It was a matter of survival. Picture a small group of hunter-gatherers crossing an open plain just after sunrise. They aren't thinking about breakfast. They're thinking about finding food before another tribe does. Some days, the hunt is successful. Other days, they return empty-handed. Sometimes they eat in the morning. Sometimes at sunset. Sometimes not at all. Their lives weren't controlled by meal schedules. They were controlled by opportunity. Food appeared when nature allowed it to appear. And when it did, you ate. Not because the clock said it was lunchtime. But because no one knew when the next opportunity would come. This was the reality for our ancestors for tens of thousands of years. A reality so different from our own that it almost feels impossible to imagine. Yet somehow, humanity went from eating whenever food was available, to believing that eating 3 times every single day is completely normal. That transformation didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen because human biology suddenly changed. It happened because the world around us changed. Little by little, century after century, until one of the most ordinary parts of our daily lives became something we almost never question. And to understand how that happened, we first have to understand how our ancestors really lived. Because before there were meals, there was only survival. If you could step into a time machine and travel back 100,000 years, one of the first things you would notice isn't what our ancestors looked like. It's how differently they lived. There were no kitchens, no refrigerators, no grocery stores, no restaurants waiting around the corner. Food was never guaranteed. Every sunrise began with uncertainty. Would today be the day the hunt succeeded? Would the berries still be growing nearby? Would another predator reach the food first? Nobody knew. For our ancestors, finding food wasn't one activity in the day. It was the day. Anthropologists who have studied modern hunter-gatherer societies, communities whose lifestyles can offer clues about our distant past, have found something fascinating. Many of these groups don't eat according to a fixed schedule. Instead, they eat when food is available. Sometimes that's once in a day. Sometimes twice. Sometimes several smaller eating occasions if circumstances allow. And sometimes, not at all. Imagine spending 6 hours tracking an animal across rough terrain. The sun is beating down. Your muscles are exhausted. Every step burns energy. Then finally, the hunt succeeds. Nobody says, "Let's wait until dinner." Everyone eats. Immediately. Because survival doesn't follow a timetable. It follows opportunity. This flexibility became one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Unlike many animals that depend on highly predictable feeding patterns, humans develop the ability to adapt. Our bodies learn to function through abundance and through scarcity. That ability helped our ancestors survive droughts, failed hunts, changing seasons, and long migrations. It wasn't comfortable, but it was effective. And that's an important detail. Because if the human body had truly evolved to require food at exactly 3 specific times every day, our species probably wouldn't have survived those unpredictable environments. Instead, we evolved something even more valuable: resilience. The ability to adjust. The ability to wait. The ability to make the most of whatever food was available. This doesn't mean our ancestors never ate more than once. Far from it. When food was plentiful, they often shared meals together. Eating strengthened social bonds. It reinforced cooperation. It turned survival into community. But those meals weren't called breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Those ideas didn't exist. The clock didn't exist. The calendar didn't exist. Nature decided when people ate. Not society. Not employers. Not advertisements. Not tradition. And for thousands upon thousands of years, that system worked. So if humans spent most of their history eating according to opportunity instead of a schedule, how did we end up believing there was only one correct way to eat? The answer didn't arrive with better food. It arrived with something much more powerful: civilization. And once humans stopped following nature, they slowly began following time instead. As human civilization slowly began to grow, so did the way people thought about food. For thousands of years, our ancestors had followed the rhythm of nature. But once they learned to farm, everything started to change. Instead of constantly moving from place to place, people built permanent homes. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. For the first time, food could be planted, harvested, and stored for months. Life became more predictable. And as life became more predictable, so did eating. But here's something surprising. Even in many ancient civilizations, people still didn't eat 3 meals a day. In ancient Rome, for example, many ordinary people ate one main meal later in the day, while lighter meals were eaten only when necessary. Meal patterns often depended on occupation, wealth, and local customs. In medieval Europe, breakfast wasn't always encouraged. In some places, healthy adults were expected to wait until later in the day before eating, while children, the elderly, travelers, and people doing hard physical labor were more likely to eat in the morning. There was no worldwide rule. No universal eating schedule. Every culture developed its own habits based on climate, religion, work, and the food available around them. What mattered wasn't eating at a specific hour. It was having enough food to survive. But as cities expanded and populations grew, people faced a new challenge. How do you organize thousands of people living and working together? The answer wasn't just better farming. It was something humanity had never depended on before: time. And once the clock began controlling daily life, it wouldn't be long before it began controlling meals as well. For thousands of years, meal times were shaped by nature, culture, and personal routine. Then, the Industrial Revolution changed everything. Factories began replacing farms as the center of daily life. Millions of people left their villages and moved into growing cities, where work no longer depended on the rising and setting of the sun. Instead, it depended on the clock. Workers were expected to arrive at exactly the same time every morning. They worked long hours under strict supervision. And unlike farming, they couldn't simply stop whenever they felt hungry. Factories needed order. Machines couldn't wait for someone's appetite. So employers introduced fixed breaks during the day. A short meal before work. Another during the middle of the day. And one after returning home. Over time, these scheduled eating times became part of everyday life. Children adopted the same routine in schools. Families planned their days around it. Entire communities adjusted to the rhythm of work. But here's the interesting part. The 3-meal pattern wasn't created because scientists proved it was the perfect way to eat. It became common because it fit the demands of a rapidly changing society. The clock had quietly taken control of something that was once guided only by hunger. And as this routine spread across industrial nations, another powerful force saw an opportunity: business. Because once people expected to eat at certain times, someone was ready to sell them exactly what to eat. By the early 20th century, the 3-meal routine had become familiar to many working families. But there was still one problem. Knowing when people would eat didn't guarantee what they would eat. For food companies, this was an enormous opportunity. If millions of people were beginning every morning with a meal, they could create products specifically for that moment. Companies producing cereals, bread, and other breakfast foods began investing heavily in advertising. They didn't simply promote their products. They promoted an idea that would become one of the most repeated health messages in history. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. The phrase appeared in advertisements, magazines, newspapers, and promotional campaigns. Over time, it became so familiar that many people accepted it without ever asking where it came from. Some campaigns featured doctors and health professionals to make the message more convincing. Others focused on busy families, suggesting that a proper breakfast was the key to a productive and successful day. To be fair, eating breakfast can absolutely be part of a healthy lifestyle for many people. But the important point is this. The belief that everyone must eat breakfast every single day was shaped by a mixture of culture, changing work routines, advertising, and evolving nutrition advice, not by a single scientific discovery that applied equally to everyone. As decades passed, schools, workplaces, and homes reinforced the same routine. Children grew up watching their parents eat breakfast before work. They grew into adults who taught the same habit to their own children. Eventually, the routine became tradition. And traditions have a remarkable way of feeling timeless, even when they aren't. By now, the three-meal pattern had become more than a schedule. It had become part of everyday culture. But modern science was about to ask a question that history never did. What if there isn't one perfect eating schedule for everyone? Today, the idea of eating 3 meals a day feels so normal that questioning it almost sounds ridiculous. But history has a funny way of reminding us that many things we consider normal weren't always that way. The 3-meal routine wasn't handed down by nature. It wasn't discovered in a laboratory. And it wasn't something every civilization independently agreed upon. Instead, it slowly emerged through thousands of years of change. It evolved as humans settled into farming communities. It became more structured during the Industrial Revolution. And it was reinforced by changing lifestyles, cultural traditions, and decades of advertising that helped shape how millions of people thought about food. But here's where the story takes another turn. Modern nutrition science doesn't tell everyone to eat the exact same way. Researchers have found that people can respond differently to different eating patterns. Some people feel energized by 3 balanced meals each day. Others prefer smaller, more frequent meals. Some find that eating within a shorter window during the day works well for them. There isn't a single eating schedule that fits every person, every culture, or every lifestyle. What matters most is whether your eating pattern supports your overall health, provides the nutrients your body needs, and fits your individual circumstances. In other words, the clock isn't the only thing that should decide when you eat. Your health matters. Your lifestyle matters. And yes, your body's signals matter too. Perhaps the most fascinating part of this story isn't that humans eat 3 meals a day. It's that billions of us accepted the habit without ever wondering how it began. A routine repeated often enough starts to feel like a law of nature. Even when it isn't. And maybe that's the biggest lesson hidden inside this story. How many other parts of modern life do we accept simply because they've always been there? Why do we work the hours we do? Why do schools start when they do? Why do weekends exist? Why do we measure time the way we do? Many of the routines that shape our lives today weren't created by biology. They were created by history. Some solved real problems. Some reflected the needs of their time. And some simply became traditions that lasted far longer than anyone expected. That doesn't mean they're wrong. But it does mean they're worth understanding. Because the moment you understand where an idea came from, you stop following it blindly. You start seeing it differently. The next time you sit down for breakfast, or take a lunch break, or gather around the dinner table with your family, perhaps you'll remember that this simple routine carries a history stretching across thousands of years. From hungry hunter-gatherers searching for their next meal, to ancient farmers adapting to the seasons, to factory workers living by the clock, to modern families carrying forward traditions they rarely question. And maybe you'll ask yourself the same question we began with. Who decided humans should eat 3 meals a day? The answer isn't one person. It isn't one company. It isn't one scientific discovery. It is the story of humanity itself. A story shaped by survival, by civilization, by work, by culture, and by change. Because sometimes, the most ordinary habits have the most extraordinary histories. And the more we understand where they came from, the better we understand ourselves. Every question has an answer. If fascinating stories like this spark your curiosity, subscribe to Hidden Origin. Every question has a story.